Welcome to my Let's Play of The Graveyard. You walk her to the bench in front of the chapel. You turn her around and let her sit down. She looks backwards to the bench when she is ready to sit. She sits. When you are done, you walk her back to the gate. You both leave the graveyard to quit the game. When you play the graveyard, you play as this old lady. Unlike other video games, you aren't quick, or spry, or move very quick. And while I was playing this game, I was reminded very much about a story, well, my own story. One of my own personal experiences that I had with my father. I remember there was one day that I was staying with my father and we were talking about his health and how it had become pretty serious. He'd had some issues and they were getting to be a little bit more serious than he should normally be able to handle, so he was set to visit the doctor soon. And that night I stayed with him to help him go to visit the doctor. And I was working at the time, and early in the morning, the next morning that is, when I was about ready to go into work, because I wanted to stay with him to make sure that his health was in good condition, I came to the bathroom to find the door open and a trail of blood and what appeared to be fecal matter, some sort of mixture of the two, trailing along the floor to the bathroom. When I get there, I see that he's very sick. He's lying in the bathtub, about neck deep in warm water. He's trying to keep himself warm from what appears to be, blood loss, of course. He had some sort of internal bleeding, and we've known about this issue for a little while. He's been taking medication for this kind of thing, and he's also changed his diet, but it appears to have gotten the better of him. So, I take him, get his clothes on, and we quickly rush off. He didn't want to be taken to the hospital because at this time there was really no way to get him any health insurance, but, I insisted, and he thought that if it could save his life it would be all right. So we quickly rush off to the hospital, and he's fairly cognizant of the fact that, everything's of what's happening. He sits down at the hospital. It's mostly the emergency ward. And, then I go to work. I leave him at the hospital for a little bit, and I come to check on him. And for the most part, he seems fine.
Tot het jaar 40, ja die Irma was nog jong. Het was een Duitser met de tering, te groot hart, te zwakke long. René, die had een vleesboom, tante Mo is in haar slaap, doodgevallen in een droom. En nooit meer opgeraapt. Kijk, dat is Emma doodgeboren, zie dat Jur niet overloopt. Haar portret al lang verloren, een blauw kruisje nooit gedoopt. En Roger, dat was de kanker, die heeft zichzelf overgroeid. Als een klimop te hoog wordt, hangt er te veel schaduw weggesnoeid. Zoutzuur op haar duim, witte bubbels, geel schuim. Staalwol om het roest te wassen, jaar en datum weg te krassen. En een beitel voor je eigen naam. Voor als we komen te gaan. tussen Jezus en benen zou ik die webben willen plukken. Wreef het zand tussen zijn tenen, als ik me nog kon bukken. Ik wil een engelke van porselein en een sprei van zwarte marmer. Het mogen stenen bloemen zijn, om mij aan te verwarmen. Zoutzuur op haar duim, witte bubbels en geel schuim. Staalwol om het roest te wassen, jaar en datum weg te krassen. En een bijtel voor je eigen naam. Voor als we komen te gaan. Hier is het rustig, is het veilig. Misschien volgende keer, misschien dan blijf ik. Dan ben ik hier niet meer. Niet meer. Niet meer.
It wasn't long before I got a call from the hospital, and the doctors wanted to perform some experimental treatment. They needed someone to sign off on it because my father had become unconscious, and the severe blood loss, that is, it was keeping him under for quite a long time. So I was the only person around to sign the document. And knowing that it could, in fact, lead to his death, or it might just be the last thing that could save his life, that whatever was left, it's almost like there wasn't any decision for me to make. I remember looking at the paper and signing it. It didn't take me more than a couple minutes, but it was almost like there was no decision. It was like I was looking at the paper, and if I didn't sign it, he was going to die. But the treatment that they were going to give him was just, it seemed so ludicrously dumb that you wouldn't be able to live through the procedure that they were going to give him anyway. And even if he did survive, there's really no way that he could continue, well, living outside the hospital. He'd be hooked up to a whole bunch of machines, and if he actually even regained consciousness, he'd probably scold me for keeping him alive in the first place. There were a lot of things wrong with his body, more things wrong with his body than we already knew were happening, and it's almost like the whole thing just was shutting down. It was coming to a close. Well, I called up my mother, and she came to the hospital, and I tried to tell the doctors to keep him alive until she got there, because they were married at the time. My mother and father were married. And when she got there, he was only alive for about a few hours. Before, when he was awake, he told me if the surgery doesn't go well, that he doesn't want any of the kids to hear any of the bad stuff about him. So I didn't have children at the time, but I knew what he meant, and anyone who knows me would also know. But the thing is that I watched him pass away in the hospital, and it took me a few days to get over it. Mourning is a very powerful feeling. You think that you can handle a situation, but unless you've experienced it yourself, it's really an unpredictable type of behavior you start to exhibit. And I remember when he died, a few days afterwards, I'd recently picked up Dear Esther, and I would play that game. I would play Dear Esther. And you can say that Dear Esther isn't a video game all you want, but I remember sitting in front of it, looking at it, and not doing anything. Just sitting there and watching it. Being unable to move. Just no energy at all. And then I finally started to complete the game. I started to work through it. I walked myself through the storyline. I started to understand things more about it. I looked things up. I researched it. And when I beat it, I went back and I beat it again. And I beat it again. And I beat it again. And again and again. And I walked myself from beginning to end so many times that I'd spent 18 hours in the game, total, collectively. And I found that I was drowning myself in just video games. That's all I could do was just play anything that I could get my hands on. I went to a diner with my friend and we had some food. I tried to talk with him, but the only thing that was on my mind, I couldn't even eat my food because the only thing that was on my mind was the smell of the blood. That was it. That was the only thing that I could think of at the time. And I was just stuck in my head. This overwhelming sense of just death that pervaded everything. I couldn't get away from it. I went to sleep with the thoughts of death. I woke up to thoughts of death. I dreamt about him being alive. And then I dreamt about him being a ghost, and then I dreamt about him being alive again. It went back and forth. I have heard this type of term called the year of magical thinking, where you start to think as though that one person were still alive, but they're obviously not, and it just doesn't match up to reality. You start thinking about what you would do if they were there, what they would say, and you do things in consideration for them. Like, you would make sure that you talk to them, or you try to call them every morning, or when you're driving down the street, you would take a detour because they would want something from the store. But there's no need to do any of those things anymore because they're not there. And as far as the graveyard is concerned, you're expecting at the very beginning of the game to walk this old lady back in order to exit the game, but if she dies while she's sitting there, there is no way to exit the game. It just sits, it just hangs. And you're watching her and she's just dead. And then you press the buttons that make her move, but she doesn't move. You think, you have this mindset like this person is still alive, but they're not. It's a very similar experience to actually going through mourning yourself, and it reminded me of it quite a lot. I'm not sure, even now, if I'm completely over the fact that he's dead. There are still some things that I do out of respect for him. But I've been able to move on with my life. And I think that a lot of people are able to move on with theirs, and sometimes at the time, I was thinking, a lot of people are taking this a lot harder than I am. Like, a lot of people are crying, and a lot of people are sad and very affected. But then I came to find out that I was the only person who was really sad. I was the only person who was mourning. When I talked to people that knew him, the conversation really, they stopped talking about him quite quickly, but for me, he was always on my mind, even months afterwards, even a year afterwards. I was thinking to myself, this is going to be 1 year after he died. And since he passed away in 2013, the feeling hasn't dissipated much. The feeling hasn't dissipated as much, seeing as how I'm coming up on the 2nd year of him being dead. And I guess it's hard to let someone go. It's hard to let someone go that you've had in your life and you've gotten attached to. But it has to happen. You've got to let them go sometime. And that's why I wanted to do this Let's Play of The Graveyard. Because Let's Plays are more of a subjective experience of games, and you can call this not a game all you want, but I'll challenge you to come up with a better term for it. With that, I'll see you later.